Welcome, everyone, to my 30-minute Ladies of the Kitchen chat that I do every month. I'm Maria DeRosa. I am the founder and just the lovely, wonderful person to be hosting this event today with someone that I am just super excited to have on, Hannah Mousour, correct?
Yes.
And I'm just going to tell you real briefly and let her do all the talking. I was recently in New York prior to going to visit my daughter who lives in Florida. And as I came out of the Metropolitan Museum, there is Hannah with this beautiful smile and this cute, simple, entrepreneurial stand that just radiated her energy and what she does, which has to do with poetry. So, welcome, Hannah. And before she talks, you guys, this is her one liner right off of her website, which I love. And it says, I am a custom, spontaneous poet. Like, how cool is that? So, welcome, Hannah.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
So, Hannah, I'm sure everyone is just so curious to know what it was you were doing outside of there, how you did that, and why. However, you
Yes,
want to wrap that up in a bow, go ahead.
yes. I spend many of my days sitting outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art or in Central Park with my 1952 Smith Corona typewriter. It's bright pink, and I set it up on a little table with a little chair and a tablecloth and a sign that says, "Ask me for a poem." And people come up to me and they tell me what they want poems about. It can be anything. I always say you can give me a word or a phrase, or you're more than welcome to spill your guts and tell me about your whole life. It often kind of turns into like a little bit of a therapy session. And then I write a poem based on what we talked about. The whole interaction almost always lasts less than 5 minutes. And then they get to walk away with a little poem.
So, this is so, overall, what people label as entrepreneur, which means you
Mhm.
have imagination, you do something different and unique. Was there something in your past that kind of pushed you to this? Did you just, I'm sure you didn't wake up one day and go, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, I've always been really drawn to creativity. I work as an actress as well, and I've always really enjoyed writing and creative writing. And I studied it in college. And one of my very best friends, Zoe Branch, she also does this. She's been collecting typewriters since she was a little kid, and she met a poet sitting out on the street with a typewriter writing poems for people, and she picked his brain and he sort of invited her into doing it for herself, and then she spread the love my way, and so I got kind of like grandmothered into it. And I fell into it because I had a computer job. I was working from home and just sort of post pandemic, whatever job I could get, and I got laid off because the company went under.
Mm,
And so I
okay.
just really needed some extra money. And that was kind of my final push to be brave enough to go out and do it.
Oh my gosh. Now, do you have to have any kind of special licensing for where you set yourself up, or how does that work in New York?
New York is really amazing in that there are so many places you can set up that you don't need any special permissions or licensing. It really depends on, so for what I'm doing, I don't
Mhm.
need special permissions, but I know if you're selling food or something like that, it's different. Sometimes music can be different because of noise pollution and stuff, but I don't need any licensing for most places in New York.
I like what you said about therapy, that sometimes it ends up being a therapy session. And I also like the fact that poetry is an art, because I feel I have an art that I do, and that involves food, and it's
Yeah.
also very therapeutic.
Mhm.
So, if someone were to ask you, how do you define art? What would that be for you and what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think art is just expressiveness, expressing your creativity. I think if you have an artist's soul, you're looking at the world through an artist's lens, anything can be art. Everything that exists around us can be consumed or taken as art. So I think it's honestly kind of an ambiguous word. And I think it's all dependent on your perspective on what is and isn't art. But if it feels like art to you, then it is art.
So obviously, I feel anyone that is literally living their passion today requires for their imagination to bloom, and obviously yours is blooming,
Mhm.
to not only fuel their mind, but to fuel their soul and their body. So tell me how you fuel your mind. What is there certain books? How do you fuel your soul? And what do you do that you go, oh, I got to have this every day to fuel your body?
Yes. Um, my mind, I'm just constantly reading poems, all the time. Poems my friends have written, poems that I find honestly on Instagram. My whole Instagram feed is just a bunch of poems. So I'm always discovering that sort of thing. I love watching films. I love reading books. There's all sorts of things I think I'm constantly trying to feed my mind with. I feed my soul by spending time with the people that I love. I always feel best when I'm surrounded by my friends and my family. And I feel my body by if I don't have breakfast every single morning, then I am done for the day. I have to have a big breakfast, and that
What
can
does
be like
that
the
include? What kind of give me an idea what your breakfast?
yeah. Well, this morning for breakfast, I had a piece of toast with peanut butter on it and a bunch of cut up strawberries on top of that, and 2 pieces of turkey bacon and a cup of coffee.
Oh, that's perfect. That's
Yeah.
very nutritious. It's got
Hmm.
protein, energy. Oh my gosh, I love it. Um,
Yeah.
so how do your parents and your family feel about what you're doing?
They're very supportive. My mom is an artist, so this is kind of like in my blood. She's
Yeah.
a potter and a metalsmith,
Oh,
and she teaches those two things for a living. And then my dad is a writer, and he was a college professor, so they're very supportive. My whole family is quite creative. I think
I
we always
love that.
knew from a young age that I was going to go into a creative
To
field.
something in that arena, expressing yourself. So
Yeah.
I noticed in your Instagram tag, and so people can follow you, which I'll put everyone in the notes.
Okay.
It has Ars Poetica, correct?
Mhm.
So why don't you tell everyone the definition and what it's about and how you're associated with that?
Yeah. So Ars Poetica is the name of the agency that represents me that I also account manage for. So it's basically how I book events. So I said I set up outside the Met. I also will be at weddings and parties and corporate events and all these sorts of different things. And my agency, Ars Poetica, is how I make those connections. So we were actually featured on the Today Show, Ars
I
Poetica.
noticed that. Now, when
Yes.
was that? I love that.
I believe that was just about a year ago now, as kind of a unique job. They were doing a spotlight on unique jobs. And so, yeah, that's basically what they are. They represent many different poets. I'm by far not the first person to do this and not the only person to do this. There are many poets in New York. There are poets all across the country, and a lot of international poets as well that we represent at Ars Poetica.
So then someone from the West Coast could be part of this as well as the East Coast. And
Yes.
do they qualify you in any way? Is there some sort of,
Yes, there's an interview process. So you have to have a typewriter, of course. You need to know how to
right?
work it.
Okay.
And you know, in the interview process, you write a poem on the spot. So the interviewer will give you a topic. You'll write a poem right then and there for them. Um, we specialize in writing poems very quickly and while also not sacrificing the human connection. You don't want it to feel like a rushed experience. You want everyone to feel like they had their special time while also trying to get to as many people as possible at any given event. So it's about speed and creativity and professionality and personality. And a lot of our poets are actually also actors, which I think makes a lot of sense in the way that it
Yes.
is kind of a performance within itself.
Yes, and
Yeah.
you absolutely did that. You were like a performance in yourself, but authentic, which I loved. And you
Mhm.
could do it on the spot. And here's something new that everyone's going to hear, and you. So
Okay.
I have the one you gave me, right?
Oh, yes.
However, what I didn't share with you is I am in the process of writing my book. It's gonna hopefully be done by December and hit
Oh,
the streets in
congratulations.
January. And I am going to put this either at the end or at the beginning. I haven't decided because it totally wraps up what I do. So I'm not going to read it because I want everyone to read it in the book.
Okay, I'm
But
so
that's
honored.
a
Thank
surprise.
you.
That's a surprise to you. And I was going to tell you, but I thought, no, this is a perfect time to surprise you.
I'm very, very excited. I will have to get a copy of this book. I cannot wait. That's so cool.
So, I know you mentioned your mom and your dad, and your family has always kind of had this gene pool of creativity going in
Yeah.
their family thread here. Is there anyone outside of that arena that you really look up to and admire and kind of say, wow, I'm kind of attracted to this person, and this is kind of like a role model. Is there someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of people like that, I think, in many, many different arenas of creativity. I have a lot of actors that I look up to, as far as younger actors, like, I really adore Saoirse Ronan, I adore Florence Pugh, these kind of more up and coming young actors. And then as far as poetry goes, I mean, my favorite poems to read are contemporary poems written by women. So, Ada Limon is our poet laureate of the US, and she's so amazing. And every time I read a poem by her or by any other poet that I admire, I feel my poetry changing. Like I feel
Like you take
it
a little
shifting
bit.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I take a little bit from every poem that I read. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many inspiring creative people out in the world, my friends included. Like, I'm inspired by my friends who are also artists and what they're able to do. So, small and big scale, always inspired.
So, what was your very first job, and do you feel that that helped you in any way?
Yeah, my first job was, I think this is right. I was like a camp counselor at a theater camp. And it was the theater camp that I went to when I was younger. And then I started working there as I got into my adolescence. And that definitely relates to everything that I'm still doing today. Yeah, I like totally. I feel like I've been lucky in that I've always known what I've liked. I've always kind of had clear passions and I've always been involved in them from a young age. So
And
everything's built to this
that
moment.
propels me to my next question because some people never figure that out, or they're just like all over the place. So, when you do meet some people, either doing what you're doing or just randomly and, networking or whatever, has anyone ever asked you, how did you figure it out? How did you know? What kind of advice would you give them?
Um, I don't know if I've honestly been asked that verbatim, but if someone were to ask me that, I would just say kind of trust the gut instinct and what you're interested in. I think a lot of people might have been interested in the arts, writing, painting, acting, whatever it may be, and at a young age kind of turned away from it because you're taught that you can't make a living that way and that it's not reasonable and it's not smart to go down that path. And I think that's so sad. And we probably have a lot of, are missing out on a lot of talent and creativity from people who were encouraged to go other directions. So
I
I would
totally
just
agree
say
with that.
follow if you have an inkling towards something, follow it.
Amen. So far, have you felt in your heart, in your gut, that you've had a memorable moment with what you're doing? Like, has there been like, oh my gosh, this was it. This was so cool. Or do you feel you have that every day?
That's a really interesting question. I think every time I go out, I'm very, very touched by any number of interactions, which is part of what makes what I do so special. But I think the very first time I was brave enough to go out and set up and writing that first poem, I just felt such a rush and so proud of myself for doing it. And I remember the person was so sweet and I wrote about his children. He paid me very, very generously. And I just remember feeling I felt just so proud of myself. That like very first rush of doing it, I think, is one of the highlights of it.
Yes. And you know what? So many people are gonna miss out on that feeling because like you said, they have created a belief, a limiting belief from
Hmm.
their society or whoever, and
Yeah.
it's like, nah, it's not gonna work for me, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah, there is a lot of talent out there, and I pray for those to come through or, you know, it doesn't matter what
Yeah.
your age. That's how
Yeah.
I say,
Exactly.
I'm not a
It's
young
there to
bunny
stay.
here, right?
Hmm.
So, if you were to choose between right now, at the age you are, to have more time, all the time to do whatever, or more money, what would be your choice?
I struggle with that because I think if I had more money, I would have more time. You
Yeah.
know, I would have to, if I had more money, I wouldn't have to hustle as hard and that would free up my time. So I'm gonna say more money with the end game of having more time.
And I think that was very diplomatic and perfect.
Yes, I think if I had more time, I would be spending that time trying to make more money.
Is there something that you're looking forward to doing professionally or personally that's kind of different in the next year coming up, which is really right around the corner, right?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, yes. So one of the many kind of creative projects I have going on is I host a podcast with my best friend Zoe, who I mentioned earlier, who's
Okay,
also
okay.
a typewriter poet.
And what's the
And
name of it? What's the name
it's
of your
called Poking Around.
poking around? Okay, everybody
And
get that. I'm writing it
wrote
down.
it down. It's a comedy and poetry podcast where we sort of kind of the thesis statement of the podcast is that writing jokes and writing poems is a very similar art form, that you're making these hyper observations about the world and then you're talking about them through sort of a side door of language. And so it's a comedy podcast where we write a lot of poems live on the podcast. And we
Oh,
want
I
to, in the coming year, expand it into a live show that has both comedians and poets and these sorts of things. So that's a passion project going on right now that I hope in the next year kind of comes to fruition.
Oh my gosh, that is a great. I've got to hop on and support
Yeah.
you. Everybody that's listening, you have to do the same. Um, what do you feel is something that you're doing that people can say, "Oh my gosh, how did she ever think of that besides the typewriter itself?" Is there, like, for
Yeah.
instance, the weather? Like, what do you do when it's raining?
Yes, that's a big problem. When winter rolls around, um, I do have to get a lot more creative with how I make money and how I do the poetry. So I layer up, uh,
Okay.
you know, 2 layers of gloves, fingerless gloves, so I can type,
Yeah.
2 hats, mini coats, and I'll go out in the winter on the days that, the few days that come around that it's nice enough and I can kind of risk it. And then if there's a long period of snow or rain or just very, very cold weather, I can technically legally set up in the subway stations.
Oh,
So I
okay.
will do that. It's not as romantic or fun,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
if I have to do that to make it work, I will. But I also really rely on gigs. So working in event spaces and stuff
Right.
is a relief because not only are you getting a set payment, so you kind of know that that box of it is taken care of, but also it's almost always inside and it's always guaranteed. So that's kind of how I do it. Every day is different. I'm looking at my weather app constantly, and I like wake up that morning and decide in the moment whether or not I'm going to be able to make it work.
What is a day? Is it like 8 to 5? Does it vary day to day or?
Yeah, so I never go out for from setup to breakdown of writing the poems. Almost never go longer than 5 hours because it's just too much on the brain. I find that's
Yeah.
kind of my stopping point. I can do longer if I have to, but typically I stop there. And I would say about noon to 5. It depends on the season. So in the summer, when the sun sets at 9, I can often do like 3 to 8, which is nice. But in the winter, I might do more like 11 to 4 or something like that. It's very dependent on a lot of factors.
So I have a question on the typewriter because
Mhm.
the one you have is literally the one I used in high school.
Oh
And
my
you
God.
mentioned it was 1952, which was the
Uh-huh.
year I was born.
Uh-huh.
So, my question is, where are people getting the typewriters and where did you get yours?
So I bought mine from an online collector. She was selling it on Etsy, which you can buy a lot of different kinds of typewriters on Etsy. It's a really great resource. But I know people who have found typewriters just sitting out on the streets, have found them at garage sales or covered in dust at, some sort of antique shop and been extremely underpriced. So what I bought mine for is kind of what they should be going for, but you can find them like in so many different locations. You can get them for free. Like there is lots of ways. I don't think people necessarily understand the value of typewriters. A lot of people just have them dusty in their basements,
Yeah.
but people collect them and obviously we don't make them anymore, so they're a rarity.
Is it hard to get the ink for them?
No, you can order it offline, be delivered directly to your door.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
And are all of yours always done in black?
Yes, yeah.
And is
Mhm.
that because it was just the classic thing that we all did, right? Black ink.
Yeah, yeah. I think the black ink is just when you receive a typewritten poem, I think that's the look, that's the thing
Yeah,
people
it's
crave
like the
in.
book, you're
Yes,
opening up
exactly.
the book of
It's the classic
poetry almost,
style and
you
yeah.
know? So, this to me is fun, okay? And what
Mhm.
I feel I do is fun, so it's not like even work.
Right.
So what is it that then you do for actual fun?
Right. Honestly, I love to spend time with my friends and my loved ones in my life. So, going over to a friend's house, making dinner together, catching up, watching a silly movie, drinking a glass of wine. I think that's what I do just to have a nice time. I also, if I have more time, um, I like to I'm by no means a painter, but I do have like some paints and some little canvases that I'll sometimes just like play around with. So I like to craft and make gifts for my friends and that sort of thing. But I would say definitely spending time with the people I love is the big one.
So you probably don't have time for a pet, or do
Mm.
you have one? Yeah, because 'cause you're
So
just
yeah,
constantly
I'm
in
out of the
motion.
house basically constantly running from one thing to the next.
Yeah.
So
And I spend so much time either traveling or in my kitchen that I think I would probably ignore my
yeah,
pet.
I know. I would love to have a pet, but I'm like, I don't think I would be I think I'd feel guilty all the time about
Yeah,
not doing
yeah,
enough. Yeah.
me too. So, if we were to put you on the spot, and since
Mhm.
I'm all about food therapy and food art, right?
Yes.
My tagline is like where food is a work of art,
Uh-huh.
and you heal from it. Would you be able to whip off a quick little poem for us
Sure, yeah,
on
about
that?
food?
And we'll just go, yeah, and we'll just end it that way.
That
And
sounds
we'll say goodbye, and
lovely.
then we'll let everyone know where to find you when you're done. So
That
you
sounds
have the
perfect.
floor. You have the floor.
Okay. I'm gonna just write it on my phone since that's what I have with
Sure.
me.
Yes, of course.
Um, okay, I'm just gonna ask like, um, what what are some of your favorite foods to cook, or what's
Okay.
food that you have an emotional relationship with? Maybe it was around a lot in your childhood or whatever it
Yes.
may be.
Okay. So I love to make pies. I made tons of pies at a restaurant, and the reason being, and the funny thing is, I don't have to have a pie to eat all the time. I get my joy from baking it and sharing it with others. Not that I don't
Yeah.
like it, but that's my joy. And the reason I think I have that association is my grandmother lived with my siblings and I growing up because my parents both worked.
Mhm.
And every time I would come home from school, she would have these things that she called pastelitos, which were little mini pies. I'm not kidding you, about this big, round. And inside was like this really delicious homemade apple spice filling.
Oh,
Yeah,
Oh, okay, perfect. That's a great topic. Okay, just give me a couple
okay,
minutes.
sure. This is hands-on, everyone. I'm gonna whisper because she's being creative, but I'm sure she can do this because outside of the Metropolitan Museum, there's tons of people talking and going. So her mind can tune out and put together a little something. And I'm so glad you guys all tuned in to listen to this. And we're gonna have to go to her Poking Around podcast and support her. We love Hannah.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
done.
All right, you're on.
All right. I will roll the dough like my grandmother's hands did before me, wrinkled and worn and finger strong with loving. Yes, let me fill wide your stomachs. Let me stuff the pastry with all the hopes I have for you. Let me bake my heart into every bite.
Oh my gosh, that's another one you're gonna have to send me. Okay,
Okay,
guys,
yes.
what a better way to end this? My logo has hearts. She
So
incorporated
sweet. Yes.
that in
Yeah.
the Thank you, thank
Perfect
you.
for you. Yeah.
I wish you, and I'm sure everyone that's gonna be listening, the best of creativity and joy for your adventures with the podcast, with Ars Poetica, right?
Yes.
And the typewriter, oh my gosh, do you sage that every time before you go out and say, okay?
No, but that's a great idea.
You know what? It's so funny. Someone once told me that whatever your extra tool is, in my
Mhm.
case, it would be, knives and
Right.
spatulas, that when they're around a lot of people, just like you have energy that you pick up and you emit, which you emit beautiful energy, it's good just to kind of like do a little special blessing over them every once in a while and say, okay, we're gonna kind of just start from scratch again.
Yes. Yeah. I should start doing that. That would be a lovely
Yeah,
practice.
it'd be cool. So
Mhm.
anyway, everyone, thank you so much. And thanks, Hannah, for joining us. And
Thank you so much for having me.
oh my gosh, yes, it was the best. Bye.
Bye.